Welcome to the North Group Podcast, where we explore the ideas that shape great leadership. In each episode, we share stories, insights, and strategies to help you lead with purpose and clarity.
I'm Gina Breslin, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Brian Black and Daryl Lisey here at North Group Consultants, and we're excited to talk about a phrase, and the phrase is trust but verify. So I did a little research, and I know the two of you know where this phrase originated from, but I didn't know. So I looked it up, and it was popularized by Ronald Reagan in the 80s during nuclear arms negotiations. So I didn't know that. What's interesting is when you think about, those Cold War negotiations, the 80s, all of that, is that this phrase is actually a really old Russian proverb. Isn't that ironic? Right. So trust the verify. So what stands out to the two of you about this statement? What thoughts would you have? Like, what kind of hits you in the face? Trust but verify.
Yeah, when I think about it, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit, but I just don't like the word but.
Tell me more.
Well, I think when people use the word but, it has a tendency to erase what was just said. And then you move on to, it's almost like a disagreement. Yes, but let me clarify, or let me move on to something else. And I'm always conscious, I think about more of, how do we use the word but to open up conversation, not necessarily shut it down. And so I'm really interested in today's topic.
Great. Thank you, Daryl.
I would just say, in a broader sense, Daryl's bringing out a principle there that maybe is not directly responsive to what you're asking, but this word but, I think we would all agree that when we work with leaders and we work with teams, that word but, not just in trust but verify, but in many environments, becomes a stumbling block. And so I love the idea that you brought that out in the beginning. Maybe it's not right on point, but the concept, you heard the but the concept itself is really rich for leaders to understand in a general way.
Yeah.
So if we would break this statement apart, it begins with the word trust. And I mean, there are books written about trust, leaders talk about trust, but, how would we describe the components of trust? What is trust, or what do you need to have trust?
Daryl, I'll yield to you on this. I think we'd probably give the same answer. So why don't you fire away?
Yep. In great part, it has to do with the relationship.
Okay.
That's real. I think where it really starts in terms of knowing the individual or the individuals that you're interacting with. Trust isn't blind, but at the same time, while it's not blind, but we'll use that a lot today.
And think about it every time we do.
Oh, boy,
think about it. Oh, my. And, it's really built off of those relationships that we have and the experiences that we have with an individual. Somebody once said years ago, the only way to have a friend is to be one. I think a lot of that has to do with trust as well. And that in order for us to trust, we need to be trusting in our own selves that individual, it's a reciprocal relationship. And I just think that's so key when we think about it from an organizational perspective, from a personal perspective. What does that really look like? And it's more than just a word.
Yeah. And there are elements, it's really difficult, I think, to completely define trust perfectly. You know it when you experience it, but sometimes we'll talk about some of the elements that underlie trust, the idea of character and competence, commitment, and care. And oftentimes when you encounter someone, you think of those four elements. When those things are present, when you experience that from someone else, character, who they are, does their yes mean yes? Does their no mean no? Competence. Are they actually doing and able to do what they've been tasked to do? Commitment. Are we with each other? Are they committed? Are we mutually committed? And care. And I think we add that in sometimes. You won't always hear 4 C's. Sometimes you'll hear 3, because really there's this sense, as Daryl said, there's a care underneath trust. And when people know that you care and you're for them, I think that engenders trust.
Yeah.
It's not formulaic, but I do think it helps to recognize those pieces and to bundle up together in how we experience people.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, in terms of you break those 4 C's apart. And as an example, we often think of character related to trust. Right. So I would trust my wife from a character perspective. Mm-hmm. I would not trust my wife to do brain surgery because she's not competent to do that.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that I don't trust my wife, but you start to break it down. And even when you're struggling, I think, with an individual or a situation, it's helpful for me and even the work with our clients, like to begin to break that down. Why is it that you don't trust them? Is it related to character? Is it related to commitment? Is it related to competence or perhaps caring? And I think that's really, really important that we just don't throw the word out, but we really begin to understand it and then talk about its application in the situation or with an individual.
That's great. Absolutely agree.
Even the way you described competence, like brain surgery, it's an exaggeration. It makes it really easy to grab a hold of, but we all have heard the phrase of making sure someone's in the right seat on your bus, so to speak. And in that, like, if we have them in the wrong seat, this could just be a competency issue. And, do we need to train them or move them to another seat, even if it's only temporarily? But I just said it, there it is. But you could quickly go to, I don't trust them, they're not performing, and end of story, and get frustrated, make a quick decision. That's not beneficial.
It's interesting. I think Gina, you and I sat in a conversation yesterday where a person we were speaking with said about when we hire in our organization, we're not just hiring a resume. It's you can train people toward competence, but you can't train them toward character, in a sense. And I think that's a really important principle. So it just feathers into this once again that even how we hire, how we think of people, competence is something that can be developed and grown. Character can too, so can care, but oftentimes in a much more incremental and difficult way.
Yeah.
So not to make too much of it, but I think, Darryl, you make a really good point about being really clear as we sit with people and we're trying to understand where trust might not be as strong as it could be, where things have been broken. What's really underneath that? I think that's a really strong point.
I think care is, like we mentioned, I don't know if it's a North Group ad or where, but somewhere along the way it does. It makes sense to add care to these and make it 4 C's instead of 3 C's. Tell me a little bit more about care. Like, why does that matter and how does that fit in?
I think part of it is too, you break down some of these words because when you use that and you're saying, okay, well, what does care fundamentally mean? I was over the years asking, numerous groups of people the question of, who's had the most significant impact on your leadership, on your life? And throughout those conversations, I would often hear variations on 2 primary themes. And those themes were they genuinely cared about me. Mm-hmm. And the second one is that they were upfront with me. They could talk to me directly.
Yes.
Those 2 things combined, and care, I think, looks different. But at the same time, there has to be, that care has to come from a deeper place, not just an overlay of my conversation or the work. It's like, it's more than just checking the box off. And so I think that caring piece, it may look a little bit different, but it comes from a genuine place from that individual.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. To just add to that, one of the questions sometimes that we'll ask folks is, hey, describe to us the best leader or boss you've ever had and the worst boss. Mm-hmm. And I remember distinctly being in a conversation with that question. The person didn't blink and said, that's easy. My worst boss said, what are you doing? My best boss said, how are you doing? And it just summed it up in one sentence.
I think we're onto something. Words with 3 letters can really make a difference, right? Whether it's but or how.
Yeah.
It's really good. That's powerful to think about. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but we talked about, competence is probably the easiest to develop in someone, right? We can get people the experiences that they need to get to the next level. We can often teach them the skills. Moving the needle in character is difficult. Care sits with us.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, if you're frustrated with someone, feeling like you're not able to trust them, how do you move the care needle? Does that question make sense?
That's a great question. I think our pause is not because it's not a good question. It's there's some elements to this, and some of it's somewhat subtle, perhaps, and maybe that's not the right word. So Darryl, rescue me from this one.
No, it really is. And again, sometimes we're so quick to have these quick answers to things. But at the end of the day, I think, what is it how do we dive deep into this question?
That's what I was fishing for.
How do we dive deep into this question? Because if we're looking for a quick answer, because we have something else to do, it doesn't really resolve, or it doesn't advance the conversation. And I think we often say here at North Group, many of our clients would hear us say this, being before doing, fundamentally who we are. And that caring piece, as I mentioned, has to come from a place of being genuine. Boy, how do you manufacture that?
Well,
because people can tell if you're
that's right.
trying to fake it.
And I got my legs under me again on this question too. I think also part of this is, if you ask the question, how do you move the needle on that? And I agree, it starts with something deep in us. But if we desire as leaders to truly do that, I think one of the starting points with someone that we lack trust or we're unsure is to come with a posture of curiosity to them and really seek to understand what's really underneath what's going on there. I think it's really easy, certainly it is for me, when I see something I don't like, to quickly assume that I need to have a solution for it and move toward it, try to fix it, before perhaps I've taken the time to deeply understand what's really going on there.
Yeah, I think in today's world too, a part of, like, if we get just even a little bit more tactical, but to just slow down. And so how do you slow down, not race towards a solution, be curious, try to figure out what's underneath, what's the why behind maybe you're seeing a behavior or a reaction, or even performance, a performance issue, like what's underneath that.
There's a quote, I can't ascribe it to anybody, but it's, people are confusing until you know their whole story. It's really I think good. I've got it right. And I find that to be true. Sure. That just doesn't make sense. What's going on there? But when you know their whole story, it's like a light bulb goes on and you realize, oh, my word. Now I understand why this is what I'm
writing. And I think there's an element too. We often talk about family origin. What are our experiences in terms of how we've been cared for, or how we've been trusted or not trusted, that we have to work through, especially as leaders, to figure out what is that impact? What is that? And then what's the impact on who I am today? And how does that impact the relationships that I have with those around me? If we're not doing some of the deep dive, some of the family of origin stuff is wonderful. Some of it's not. Some of it's subtle. And the ability to really recognize that within ourselves, I think, opens up the door then to have this broader conversation about trust.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we think about trust, like, why does it matter? Why does it matter in an organization, on a team? I mean, maybe that question's super obvious, but sometimes I think, it's good to just go back to the obvious. But why does trust matter? That could be a whole separate podcast.
Well, the question itself is interesting, because it's almost like, at the end of the day, it absolutely matters. It absolutely matters. It's so foundational. I really have enjoyed Lencioni's book over the years, 5 Dysfunctions of the Team. Baseline, when there's an absence of trust, you can't move from that. And so maybe we think we can, but at the end of the day, we have to have trust within an organization. We have to have trust on an organizational level. We have to have trust on an individual level. And what does that look like? And how are we fostering that as time goes on? So to me, it's the base of a lot of things within our own personal lives and with organizations.
And I would add to that, in relationships and organizations, when there is a lack of trust, and Daryl's right, it's foundational. You will see in a relationship or an organization, we get into a defensive or reactive posture with each other.
Yeah.
When trust is present, fully present, there's really a sense like, think in your marriage, there's like no mountain we can't climb. There's no thing we can't walk through together. There's nothing we can't do. And organizations are very much like that. There's no conflict we can't find our way through when trust is present. So it's really the difference between being able to move forward together and have some wind in your sails, or whether you're really fighting a headwind in every conversation, in every interaction. I think it's that fundamental.
Yeah. No, you're right, Brian.
If we get inside all sorts of organizations, nonprofits, ministries, for-profit, family-owned, privately held, when we think about all the different organizations we're inside of, how are some of the ways that you've been able to quickly see, whoa, trust is a problem here? Like when trust is lacking, it seems obvious sometimes. So what will you notice or what will you observe?
Yeah, where they have a handbook that is 200 pages long, and it's filled with all kinds of policies that I literally, obviously with an HR background, I think about that a lot. And even as an example, and I know this is maybe off to the side, but where does clarity move into control? Where does clarity move into control? Where it's like, really, we need to do this because we don't believe, we don't trust. And so we're going to have some outside. And again, I'm not jumping off the cliff here saying you shouldn't have a handbook. There's reasons to have it. But a lot of times, the policies that we write, and they're voluminous. And quite frankly, some of them don't even make any sense anymore because they were written for somebody back in the day who did something wrong. And then we're like, well, we assume that everybody either has the potential or will violate that, so we're going to keep it on the books. And so you think about this whole idea of clarity to control. To me, that's one of those things that I'm like, now wait a second. We not saying it's an absolute lack of trust, but we need to be thinking about that.
Yeah. So Darryl, you're just a little passionate about that.
I'm a little passionate about it.
Well, I'm remembering you had a story, something about a bereavement policy that went a little sideways.
Well, it wasn't sideways. It was an example here, and we don't have a bereavement policy, and there was a question about a bereavement policy, and what would we do? And so we don't have it because the needs vary. And so in one particular case, one of our staff had a parent who passed away, only child. The parent lived in New Jersey. That individual needed more time.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Than maybe a 3-day for whatever we say, right? And so, hey, this is the bereavement policy for you. In another case, there was a question, the bereavement policy. And as we began walking through it, this individual's grandparent was near death. And in the conversation, I said, well, why don't you take a bereavement day to go see him before he dies? Like, why are we waiting until the end? Yes. Now, why am I saying that? I understand that organizations may need clarity, but part of it was in terms of the trust. We trusted those individuals, but they weren't taking advantage of us. Part of it was their character. That contrast, I was talking to an individual the other day who worked for an organization in HR, and in order for you to be paid bereavement, you had to bring in the death certificate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're like, no,
what?
Wait a second. Wait, what did he say? And he said, I literally could not do it anymore, and I left the company.
Wow.
And you think about that in terms of, this trust, verify. I understand we want guidelines, we want clarity, but we don't want that to then go, okay, well, now we have to check everything with everybody.
And somewhere along the way, they likely suspected someone of faking, right?
Yes.
I have a funeral today, right? They faked it. And so then we wrote a 6-page policy and we took it to the next level, like proof that you have.
And again, we're
right?
not talking about clarity, and I recognize that we want that, but sometimes that clarity turns into control. And then what we do is we're conveying to everybody, we don't really trust you. We don't really trust you.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not jumping off the cliff here to say we shouldn't have those guidelines. But at the same time, you think about what are the behaviors of organizations and leaders that convey something, maybe that the intent isn't anything other than I trust you, but we surround ourselves with these things that convey a very different story.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Gina, you were asking, and I think, Darryl, that's a great illustration of what are things that we see in organizations that suggest there's a lack of trust. And that's a clear one. I think of triangulation. There's really present in organizations where instead of people having the conversations in the meeting or with the person they should, the best meetings take place after the meeting or in the parking lot. And that's a sure sign, in my mind, that we don't have the trust in an organization that we need. Occasionally, and I know others of us do this, sometimes with a team where we're just beginning to build some collaborative momentum, I'll say, let's make a list. We're not going to talk about these things, but let's make a list of all those things that are hard to talk about here, or maybe even we just can't talk about. Now, we're not going to talk about them today, but let's make the list. Mm-hmm. And you start making the list and you realize, of course, the longer that list is, at least in a qualitative sense, maybe we're not counting, the more indication that we are not able to get to the conversations that really matter. So I think that's another true symptom of an organization where trust is absent or is not at the level it should be.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think about is, we talk about this all the time. It all starts with leadership. And, one of the things that we experience early on in our work with clients is often we're sitting with the highest level leaders in the organizations and really getting a sense of, are they vulnerable? Are they open-spirited? Is there good communication coming from them? How are they posturing themselves? Because if leaders are posturing themselves this way, other than a handbook that requires, the obituary, there's a really good chance that that's fragrancing the organization.
Sure. Yeah. One of my favorite phrases, and again, I don't know who to attribute it to, but what gets modeled gets repeated. So if that leader at the top is demonstrating we can't trust anyone, we are only going to verify it, right?
Yes.
And the other thing too, Brian, you said something in terms of, the conversations, the triangulations. I had a client one time that said, he would always say, are we talking to people or are we talking about them?
Yes, that's exactly it.
And focusing on how do we build trust? I don't have to hear this from someone else. I don't want to hear this from somebody else. I want to hear this from you.
Exactly.
And that's a powerful place to be.
Yeah. I literally was in a one-on-one session this week with a leader in an organization, and he had a concern with another leader in the organization. But the way the org chart's structured, he doesn't have a direct line to that person. So he went to his direct line, the person above him, and expressed all of this, just dumped all of his frustration on his direct up report, who has no influence over any of this, but he just felt he had to take it to someplace. And so as he was narrating this to me, I was grateful that he was articulating it, but I said, I'm not really in love with the idea that you went to someone who has no skin in this and can't do anything to help resolve it. And, we talked about the need to go straight. And I would, to be candid, there's a trust issue there that's pretty evidence in why that triangle occurred. So again, we see it in practice. We see it in our organizations. We could see it in our families.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We can see it in our families.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah. And I would say, just clarity, my passion about handbooks or the lack of handbook comes from an HR background. So I'm one of them. So
are you suggesting though I can't be passionate?
Oh,
no. HR handbook.
You are.
Or don't have an
please,
HR background.
Please.
I will tell you, I'm not passionate about handbooks. I know that maybe they're necessary, but
I understand.
Conversation for another day, for sure. When organizations have high levels of trust, when teams lead with that foundation, what are some of the benefits? Like, why does it matter?
Efficiencies.
Efficiencies, right?
Sure. We would say here over the years, Brian, I'm sure you heard this, that, fundamentally management is a waste of time. If I'm here to make sure that you're getting your job done, are we headed in the right direction? And again, it's one of those phrases that you can take to an extreme. We're not doing that here. But I think, the efficiencies of trust are just huge, that we don't have to sort of backpedal, wonder, no, that person I do trust. I do trust them, whatever the context is, character, competencies, commitment. Efficiency is huge when it comes to the benefits of trust.
I'm going to go on a limb, and this will definitely be misunderstood if I say it wrong. I would say trust in an organization is a bigger accelerant of success than the resumes sitting around the table.
Oh my!
And I'm not suggesting that competence doesn't matter, but trust is a bigger accelerant of success on execution, on cohesion, on moving toward a common purpose, toward having the kinds of real conversations and taking that list we just described as things we can't talk about, organizations where trust is high. In the perfect world, that list has nothing on it.
Yeah.
It's just a question of finding the right place, the right time, and the right people to have the conversation.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great.
I often share this story. So Tim Heist, a teammate of ours, wonderful individual. We were in a meeting together with a client, and I made a comment, and in hindsight, it wasn't great. I could have used a lot of other phrases to make this point, but I used something that was, just not great. Client was fine, meeting went great, but literally the minute that meeting was over, Tim was at my door, and he just said, "Hey, Gina, can I just share something with you? That comment that you made, like that didn't sit well with me. That just didn't quite fit." And I knew it. I knew it actually the minute I said it, like, "Oh, why did you say that? There were better ways to articulate the point you were trying to make." But him coming to me, like the trust that I have in him is better and stronger because of that. And I think so often we don't have that conversation because we're afraid trust is going to take a hit or the relationship is going to weaken. But when you're clear, and again, it was all the things. It was an immediate, like he came to my door right away. He was straightforward. I knew exactly what he meant when he said, that comment, boom. Great trust in Tim.
That stirs so many things in me. Yeah. There are so many things inside of that. You made the comment, and it's so crucial. The level of trust that you and Tim had going in the room was already
correct,
sky high.
Yes, yep.
So that was the foundational piece. The second thing is, we do, in many ways, I think we are raised this way. I'm not blaming my parents for this, but we're kind of raised to believe that you can't speak the truth and maintain the relationship. And subtly we get that message that somehow if I really said what I was really thinking, somehow the relationship would be degraded. And what you just said, and I think it's fundamentally true of how God wired us, when someone does speak the truth to us in care,
right,
not with an ulterior motive, we share a common purpose, they speak truth in care, it just grows the relationship.
Because what you think about, what do I know now? I know he's got my back, and I know he cares enough to tell me.
Absolutely.
Like that's a game changer.
Well, and that's a key piece too, that we not only trust what they're saying, but we trust their intentions.
Exactly. Sure, yeah.
We trust their intentions, which is like, okay, maybe that felt a little funky, but your intention, I know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
I know why you're engaging me in these conversations. That's so powerful because as humans, we are going to mess up. We are going to mess up. We're going to
every day.
Yeah. And so you look at people and the trust is there that at the very least you trust my intentions. It doesn't take my responsibility away to say it appropriately, but the intentions are powerful.
How many leaders do we sit with? And I actually feel this in our organization that will say, I just so want candid feedback. And I feel like I don't get it. I feel like everyone tells me, you're great, and leaders will often say to us, I just wish someone would come to me and say, John, Jim, Sally, can I give you some feedback? We're all looking for it in a trust-based relationship. The other thing I think when trust is high in organizations, and one of the benefits is people admit mistakes in an organization because we all make them. And so instead of feeling like I have to take them underground or try to cover them up or justify, I actually can come into a team or to a relationship and say, hey, Gina, I messed this up. I'm stuck. I need help. I'm sorry. Whatever it is, organizations where people could admit their mistakes, another accelerant to cohesion. We're going to get far, far along the road with that kind of culture.
Well, I often say, when you mess up, you fess up. And you can hear, I would jokingly say the sucking sound because it will attract people to you.
Oh my, yeah.
When you do that. And we look at that as saying, well, I can't be that vulnerable because I have to have a certain, way that people look at me. But the reality is just the opposite. And so that builds trust. That vulnerability just builds tremendous trust, especially over time. Powerful place to be.
Well, and let me add just a quick story to that. I was sitting in a leadership team where the top leader in the organization, the CEO, was in the room, and they had made a small acquisition that a lot of people around the table had said to this leader, we don't think it's a good idea. We think it's going to be a distraction. Very clear. I was in the room when that was communicated, 6 months ahead. They make the acquisition, and the leader comes in the room and he says to the team, guys, I made a mistake.
Wow.
I am sorry. I heard what you said, and I just believe, this is almost word for word, I just believe that I knew better. And I realize now I didn't know better. And I'm sorry for what it's costing some of us here in the organization to try to shepherd this thing. I'm sorry I did it. I made a mistake. If you want to see a team get behind him and say, we'll be okay, change the whole tone of the conversation. The meeting before, little talk in the corners like, I don't know why we did this. Why did we do this? This was stupid.
You tried to tell him, he didn't listen.
That vulnerability
Yeah.
and admitting a mistake, especially at the highest levels.
Especially at the highest levels. Yeah. Yeah.
There's no words.
It's really cool. So we're kind of segueing right into my next question before we move on to the but verify. How do we build trust? So admitting mistakes, saying I'm sorry, being vulnerable. Daryl, you had talked about to gain trust, you need to extend trust or be trusting. Is there anything that I'm missing? What else would we add? How do we
build? A couple things I think about, but Daryl being the HR background guy, he'd probably think of this. I think there's, we talked about vulnerability, and I think that people need to know that leaders are for them, right? And I think that's inherent in here. But one thing too, and maybe this is a little bit granular, is I think we also need to address and deal with inappropriate behaviors in our organization and be willing to have the courage when something isn't going well, when someone's not behaving well. We talked about, understanding why, but we can't let that kind of thing fester. Because I think when you don't create an organization where people feel safe, that's part of, I think, wrapped into trust.
One of my favorite stories, and I forget which, I'm pretty sure it's Stephen Covey, I forget which book, but he shares a story of his son getting, I think, his driver's license and then having access to the car. And they just had a conversation when he got his license to say, hey, we want you to follow essentially the rules of the road, and if you don't, so get in trouble for excessive speeding or whatever the things are, then, we're going to take the car for whatever X. So they set a clear expectation. And he did get in trouble for excessive speeding. The police were very kind to him, and they actually didn't, because I think the consequence would have actually been to take the driver's license. So the police were kind. They let him off, essentially. Parents, of course, find out about all of this. And they say, well, we are going to move forward with that consequence that we set forward so that you can trust us. I love that story because we don't think about accountability that way, that it's our integrity that's at risk. And when we are
really
moving forward in that way,
it's really good.
Just one of my, I'm not telling it as great as he did, but it's in the book and it's,
excellent.
Yeah.
Great example.
Right.
Well, and you think about that, even, we're talking about family as well. You think about parenting, when you say something to your child, you better follow up, So right. Two things there. Number one, don't say something ridiculous that you're not going to follow up on. But secondarily, I think that builds trust that what my parents say, what my dad says, what my mom says, I can count on, even if I don't like it. I can count on that. And Brian, that goes back to what you had said earlier in terms of, identifying behaviors even within our organization, that when we look back at our values, do our values really mean something?
Yes.
And our ability to not just talk about them, but to apply them to situations where the outcome may be a difficult outcome for somebody perhaps, it absolutely builds trust within the organization, and it strengthens the organization where, again, you think about verify. At the end of the day, we want people to be led by our values because we can't be with them time, minute by minute, day by day. And so you're hoping that to the organization anyway, you've been living them out in such a way that they can trust not just you, but those values.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the next question I'd like to get into is the question around the but verify. So we're talking about trust but verify. There is a degree to which some accountability structures, some measurements, probably important. How would you describe that? Why? Yeah. What do we need? Is it helpful?
Well, and we all know accountability is critical. I think one of the keys for me is at what point does, I said this earlier, at what point does clarity become control? And what does that look like? And I know there's the temptation, and I understand it, as an organization continues to grow, that our ability to interact with individuals on a more personal level maybe begins to become a little bit more difficult, and some of that clarity is important. But we always have to be careful that the accountability doesn't move, or the clarity doesn't move into a control environment. Because now what you're doing is we have the potential of, now we're just, having people, respond to what we're telling them. And you think about organizations where there's innovation that's important, and you see that in organizations as well, where innovation is important, that there's freedom, there's context. I think, Brian, you've talked in the past about, what are the sidelines, on a football field, or what does that look like? Because it would be chaotic if we didn't have it. But when you're in the field, you've got to be able to maneuver,
right? And
you're going to be more successful, obviously.
That's a metaphor I often use, with clients thinking about this. As Daryl's talking about, when we provide clarity, it's helpful when we can to define it by edges, and that's how I think of it. So the playing field, to your point, Daryl, is this long, it's this wide, and you can run in the field. You can run the plays, short plays, long plays, whatever you think you need to obtain your objectives. If you're going to go off the field, we need to have a conversation, but I want you to feel free to run on the field. And I think that's important, back to your point of not getting overly controlling, but clarity is important if we're going to have a healthy, trust-filled organization. The other thing I think is a practice that, we always encourage leaders is to, one of the ways you verify is you stay close to your people.
Yep.
And I mean that in a one-on-one type environment where you're sitting and listening and you're having accountability conversations that are direct and healthy. How's this going for you? Were you able to get that accomplished? If you didn't, what obstacles? How can I help you? When you stay in those kind of dialogues, you grow an accountability of verification that does some other things for your trust and culture beyond just verifying. So I think that's another practice that's healthy in verification.
Oh, that's great.
I would be lying if I said I didn't throw this phrase into ChatGPT and see what it came up with. But one of the things, and I wouldn't have thought about this right away, but the minute I read it, you're like, of course. But when you're checking in, whether it's those one-on-ones, when you are verifying maybe, you are actually infusing that responsibility with importance. Like, I'm checking in because it matters. Like, if you ask someone to, again, give them some responsibility, but you never follow up, never check in, well, does it really matter? Does anyone care? So I just thought, when I read that, so again, don't know who authored that, but it certainly made a lot of sense to me.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other examples of how you've seen the measuring or the verification done really well? Like, if we could leave our leaders with hey, yes, we want to trust our people. We want to give them freedom within a framework, but we do need to measure, check on progress as well. It's an and, it's not an either or. We're taking away the but. Is there anything else that you would add to how does that verification, what does it look like when it's done really well?
Well, I was just going to say, in a team environment, we talked a little bit about one-on-one.
One-on-ones, right.
But I see in a team environment some healthy ways when teams do it well. Again, these are practices, but the spirit of this is we get in the room and, for example, if we're running a strategic plan and we have goals and objectives and 90-day objectives, when the team gets in the room and each person kind of brings their piece, but the posture in the room is not with arms folded. It's more like, how do we help? What do you need from us? Are there people are with me inside of it? I think that's a very healthy way. I have some teams that'll do little daily stand-ups with their team. Like, they'll just do 5-minute stand-up at the start of the day just to talk about, this is more in the manufacturing kind of environment.
Sure, even construction.
Yeah,
right?
Construction. What are our objectives for the day? And re-clarifying and really recognizing we're all starting with a common purpose. Today we have a common purpose. Again, little practices, but when it's done really well, you'll hear people that don't have those kind of organizations say, to your point, I don't know how I'm doing.
Yeah.
No one ever gives me any feedback, or I get surprised in a performance evaluation. It's the first time I've heard it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I want to go back to just again, reiterate, the identification and then the communication, constant communication of an organization's values, vision, and mission. Because again, we can't sit next to everybody every day, and they're going to be confronted with things that at that level, specifically saying, hey, is this consistent with who we are? Yes. I would often say, again, from an HR perspective, if we were dealing with a situation, do we have a policy? Well, in the absence of a policy, do we have a precedent? But fundamentally, in the absence of either one of those, what's the principle that we can abide by? And that becomes, in many ways, to me, from a clarity, accountability standpoint, that it just doesn't become something that sits on the wall, but it's active, it's living, and we're continually communicating it. And I think, and we're asking other people, are we living out our values, vision, and mission? It's a great question, I think, to be asking on a regular basis, not just when we're facing a situation.
I'll just add to that. This may be a little off of verify, but I think this is an accelerant to trust, and that is even storytelling in organizations. It's not uncommon for us to say to groups, hey, let's tell stories about when you've seen the best of, when you've seen that value lived out well in our organization, because we will be quick to spot, because we're people, things that aren't right. And we need to as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we need to be able to spot what's really right and call it out. So, even ways that we can do that can help an organization in that verify side do it in a healthy way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So I also wanted to just touch briefly on not only the size of an organization, but maybe how young an organization is, and how do you see the verification piece work differently when an organization is smaller and or younger, right, versus, older, more experienced, more sophisticated?
I often think, I was working with a client a number of years ago, and it was a new startup, but they were on the verge of, I think, hiring, their 80th employee. So it was a quick growing organization. And I remember sitting with the head of HR, and this individual mentioned that the owner of the company said, at some point, they already had like 70 employees. At some point, we're going to have to start hiring employees. And at first I was like, what? Dumbstruck, like, what do you mean you already have 70? But those were the people that were so close to the founder that they knew instinctively, and they were buying in very quickly to what this was all about. And so I recognize, again, just like in that conversation I had, that at some point we're going to begin to hire people that maybe aren't as close. And so we're going to have to put some structures in, but we don't want those structures, again, going from clarity to control.
Yeah, it's well said. And I when I think about this, we all agree that as organizations grow, there are some layers that get added even on the org chart, but just this need for clarity. What I think sometimes I've experienced with some of our clients, and probably in my own world, is as we grow sometimes, and we went from everyone knew everybody and everybody could doorway each other, there is sometimes a temptation to kind of swing the pendulum a little too hard.
Right.
And now we feel this need to really clamp down. And Darryl, I think you alluded to it early, like that sometimes we just want to do the right thing with the person that's in front of us as much as we can. So I have a client, it was the remote work policy concept.
Okay.
Where for years, remote work wasn't a thing for years, but as this business has grown now, and again, it grew from, let's say, 40 to 95 employees in the time that so essentially doubled. There's really been a demand or a desire for some flexibility in the schedule. The challenge has been that the work ethic there forever has been the only way I know you're working is if I see you here and you're working. So we would even notice when, this person's truck would leave and when it would come back, because we were aware of these things. And so as a result of that, we've had, this organization has not been able to hire some, I think, really strong hires because of this belief that if we can't see it, it isn't happening, right? So I think organizations have to wrestle with that. I'm not being critical of it, but it's a reality of how do we create that freedom? And I think it goes back to hiring people as best we can, whom we believe have the character and the commitment and the care they can be part of a high trust organization.
Well said. Well said. So if we wanted to leave our listeners with one or two takeaways, what would you suggest?
The first one I was going to say is exactly what Brian just said. Watch the gate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Watch the gate as best as you can. Watch the gate. Because again, those individuals and the next ones you hire, it's built off many times the people within the organization.
Absolutely.
And that would be the first thing, just watch the gate.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say there's a temptation to think that trust can be a soft issue because, we need talent and we need resumes and we need, and it is an and, not a but or an or. And trust is so foundational, and I said it earlier in this conversation, that I would argue that trust is more of an accelerant. And I think it's really important to recognize it is worth every bit of effort to build a high trust organization. Second thing is that there's a lot of hope and opportunity to build trust. You can do it. It begins, though, with you.
Yeah.
Right? And that sounds corny, but we shouldn't sit around in our organization, in our marriages, in our, in our churches and wait for someone else to make the move.
Just have a short story to illustrate that, but someone came to me one time and they had clearly broken trust with someone. They knew it. Clearly the other party knew it. And their question was will they ever trust me again? And the answer is very hopeful. You can behave your way back incrementally over time.
Yes.
You do the right thing, maybe even a little bit extra, but you do that right thing again and again, and you will build trust. So,
exactly right.
And Daryl, I loved what you said earlier. Look, is there a policy? If not, have we set a precedent? And if not, what is our principle? And you so made the case for we need to understand why we exist as an organization and what right behaviors specific to our organization look like. So,
absolutely.
Thank you very much. Exciting to talk today about trusting and verifying to create freedom and a framework. Thank you.